There are films that are so perfectly formed, living entirely within their own universe, that the idea of anyone, for whatever reason, attempting to recreate them is ludicrous. There's no need for a sequel, no need for a remake, because the original film stands as its own entirely unique work. Anything that you do to expand on that invariably cheapens the whole project. One such film is Jim Morrow's 1987 movie Street Trash, a film that emerged from out of nowhere and was one of the most original works of creative cinema to appear in that decade. The impact of Street Trash is one of those moments where you had to be there because, as with a lot of 1980s cult movie history, it's been somewhat rewritten by people who weren't even born when the film came out. We're so used to the hype involved in ready-made cult movies today that we assume that it was always that way, where a movie like, say, The Greasy Strangler is telegraphed as outrageous and wild and whatever else before anyone even sees it, then plays the festival circuit to an audience already primed to see it as a cult movie, even though that's an oxymoron. Cult movies evolved, they're not prefabricated. We can blame Troma for this, with films like The Toxic Avenger that were knowingly outrageous and marketed as cult classics from the off. No one was being fooled back in the day, but it perhaps speaks to how the very idea of a cult movie has moved from being any sort of film that develops a devoted cult following over a period of time, often years, not weeks or months, to deliberately created weird films that are cynically pitched as cult classics before anyone's even seen them. We might see these two definitions of cult cinema as the difference between the 1987 Street Trash and the 2024 remake, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Back in 1987, Street Trash appeared with very little hype, slipping out onto the VHS rental market and having little press coverage in the genre magazines. Back then, dozens of horror and exploitation movies that you'd never heard of were being released on tape every month, so there was nothing to really suggest that Street Trash was going to be anything special. Maybe an intriguing cover and a provocative title, but not much else. Now, I may be wrong about this, but I think that the film appeared on tape in the UK long before it had ever been covered in Fangoria. My memory is that the Fangoria piece, about the special effects of course, came once the film had found an audience that was blown away by it. Certainly the screening at the first Shock Around the Clock festival came after the film had been released on tape and was as much a chance for people to see the uncut version as anything. This is a film that built an audience through genuine word of mouth, as people rented the tape and were blown away by the sheer invention of the movie. Street Trash had the same visual invention that drove movies like The Evil Dead, the same sense of grindhouse nostalgia and bad taste that inspired Basket Case, and most importantly, a genuine originality and daring that grabbed viewers, even the ones in the UK who were denied a few of the more outrageous moments. The most intriguing thing about the BBFC's attitude towards the film in retrospect was how little was cut. Close-up shots of the severed dick flying through the air during the game of toss, and a couple of moments that triggered concern about sexual violence. Most of the astonishing gore and gloop was left untouched. Street Trash was impressive because it blurred genres. Was this a horror film? Not really. Was it exploitation? Was it art house? Was it underground cinema? Was it comedy? Well, yes. It was all those things, mixed together in a way that the cynically created work from Troma could never match. The film existed in its own world, one that it never really left. While it had its protagonists and villains, the street bums and the authority figures, it wasn't trying to make a grander point. It was just a study of life in this singular community where no one, almost no one, was a likeable figure. Even our central heroes are selfish, corrupt, awful human beings. The film drips with a cynical misanthropy and a gleeful disregard for good taste, and it never wavers from its central vision. So why remake it? I get the reasons for remaking movies that have some mainstream audience recognition, but Street Trash is hardly in that league. It's hard to imagine that there's big money to be made from a Street Trash franchise, but who knows? Apparently it's down to a love of the original by writer-director Ryan Kruger, though you might think that if you loved the film that much, you might not want to shit on its legacy. Or, at the very least, you might understand what made that film work. Kruger clearly has no idea about that. In the original movie, the body-melting gross-out moments were actually few and far between, a part of a wider narrative, not the whole thing. And they were inventive, varied moments of physical destruction, each unique to itself. Here, they're relentless and identical, a series of interchangeable moments that offer nothing new after you've seen the first one. But you know, it's not all about the gore. Maybe this new version of Street Trash has other moments to make it worthwhile. Well, no. Not remotely. Kruger introduces a new and somewhat half-baked bit of social commentary about the rich trying to clear the homeless off the streets to create a glistening new utopia. Well, that's radical. What an edgy concept, eh? That'll really make people think. Call me a cynic, but I don't think a message that gentrification and the class division are bad things is exactly radical. Maybe Kruger thought the audience for Street Trash would be the 1% and he was going to make them think again like a heroic champion of the poor. If that was the idea, maybe he should have worked on making his homeless people more relatable. Instead, we have a collection of one-dimensional characters who spend their time telling dick jokes and getting stoned. Some of the actors here have done other stuff, proper films, so I guess they can act. You never know that from watching this, so I assume the flat and empty or unconvincingly cartoonish performances are down to some sort of directorial choice. And aesthetically, this is the most polished bunch of homeless people you'll ever see. The original film was determinedly grubby, but this just feels like middle-class cosplay. The film, which is ostensibly a sequel, not a remake, lifts moments from the original to recreate less effectively, including the severed dick, which here just doesn't work. Every point is laboured, every original ideas from the first film, because this movie has none, hammered into the ground. And I'll be damned if I can figure out what the tone of this is. I think that it's supposed to be a comedy. At least that's what the constantly dumb joke-telling characters and their unconvincing buddy behaviour seems to suggest. But then it suddenly becomes very straight-faced and serious. You know, good filmmakers can just about pull off that combination. Kruger can't. It's notable that the original Street Trash has a dark, constant humour that never wavers. It's an uncomfortably funny movie that has an even tone throughout. This new version simply feels confused. The fact that people are praising this for being shot on 35mm instead of digital is rather telling. Talk about missing what matters. Not only has the film been polished within an inch of its life so that you'd never know that it was shot on film unless you were told anyway, but who really cares? You know, it's the message, not the medium, that matters. Similarly with the practical effects, yes, they're impressive and it's always good to see physical gore given that CGI splatter has yet to even come close. But if the film as a whole is awful, then what does it matter? The physical effects here feel like opium for the people, a distraction from the fact that this film not only sucks but forever taints the original movie by connection. The new UK Blu-ray release, the release of which is why I'm reviewing it now, interestingly comes with the original Street Trash included. I'm trying to remember if this has ever happened before, the first release of a remake including the original film. It smacks a bit of bets being hedged, and I suppose that if you don't own a copy of the first film, then, you know, this might be worth picking up. Though you can still get comparably priced copies of earlier releases that have more extras. So, anyway, have you seen the new Street Trash? And if so, what did you think? Remember, this is all just my opinion, and, you know, unless you are Ryan Kruger, there's no need to act as though I've murdered your granny if you disagree. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.